Quilters are so funny. Sometimes we want to make a quilt that teaches us a new technique or a new skill, something to really push us outside our comfort zone. Something that is more elaborate and more intricate than anything we've ever made before. And sometimes we just want to make a fun quilt using our favorite fabrics, using some mindless piecing, which is what we're going to do tonight on the Midnight Quilter. Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from Quilting Is My Therapy, your favorite midnight quilter. And in this episode, we're gonna make the Bear Tracks quilt. I designed this pattern using the traditional bear paw block. It's technically a one block quilt, but we're gonna use fabric placement to create a quilt that looks way more intricate. The Bear Tracks quilt uses 20 fat quarters, and that actually includes the binding as well. And for the fabric, I decided to use some prints from my Urban Collage fabric collection. This collection consists of dark, cool grays, tans, a little bit of golds, and some really cool textures. I have some lighter prints and some darker prints, and some of my favorite fabrics, I've included 2 fat quarters in there. You might think it makes the same block, but trust me, they're gonna look completely different. And then we're actually using 2 different colors of fabric for the background. I decided to go with a navy solid fabric and a cream tonal. These are the perfect colors to make these fabrics shine. And of course, if you want to quilt along with me and make this Bear Tracks quilt, we have the kit, the pattern, and the fabric available on our website. All you have to do is click the link in the description box below or visit quiltingismytherapy.com. But before we can dive into the cutting, I'm going to divide up my fat quarters into 2 different piles. There are 2 different versions that make up the blocks of this quilt, so I'm going to divide them into 2 groups. One of these are going to be cut for block A, and one's going to be cut for block B. You don't really have to overthink this. I just want some lights and some darks in both piles. I might put this dark one on this side, light over here. Well, now that I've got that all sorted, let's get to the cutting. I'm going to start with the first pile of the fat quarters. Since they're all going to be cut out the same way, I can stack a couple on top of each other. The number of fat quarters I can cut at one time depends on how tired I am or how much wine I've been drinking, and since this glass is almost empty, I better just stick with 2. So from each of these, I'm going to cut a strip for the binding. We know I don't love binding, but I do love the look of a scrappy binding. Then I'm going to cut it into squares and strips to make our blocks. I'm going to need a bigger square for the half square triangles. And then these smaller squares and bigger squares are going to go for the rest of the block. As I cut, I'm dividing up the pieces by fabrics. It's going to take a little bit of time right now, but it's going to make the blocks come together really fast when it's time. Now it's time to cut the second set of blocks, which I'm going to cut a little differently than I did the first set. Again, stacking those fabrics on top of each other and then cutting them into the squares and strips that I need to make the blocks. Want to know my lazy secret for keeping the blocks straight? I put my wine glass by the first set and my popcorn by the second set. Once I have all the fat quarters cut, it's time to cut out the background fabric. I'm going to cut out strips and subcut those into smaller strips and squares. I guess the term mindless sewing isn't quite right for this. I still have to pay attention. It's more like low focus quilting. It's the kind of sewing that doesn't have like 87 pieces to make a block and you're worried if you use the wrong 1.5 inch square in the wrong area. No, none of that. Mindless quilting is perfect when you just want to sit and relax and not have to think too much about what you're working on. It's also perfect for quilting retreats, since I don't have to focus so much on the piecing. I can chat with my fellow retreaters while we sew, check out everybody's projects, and just have a good time without worrying about whether or not I've misplaced a block. You might be amazed at the subjects I have heard discussed at a quilting retreat. Some of the conversations that I've heard, participated in, would make a sailor blush. Everything from to and more. Non-quilters rarely believe me when I tell them that quilters aren't necessarily prim and proper ladies that discuss weather while we sew. If you've never been to a quilt retreat, I highly suggest it, even if you go by yourself. Quilters are so friendly, and like I said, the conversations that you get into are a lot of fun. I've decided that once I retire, I'm gonna be a lady who retreats. I'm gonna go to every retreat, all the retreats. Once I'm done cutting up all those pieces, I'm gonna take a moment and organize my piles. I like to go ahead and group all the fabrics needed for each block together. It helps keep them organized and keeps the whole piecing process pretty mindless. Each set of blocks is gonna get different background fabrics. So for the first set, some of them will get the blue background fabric and some will get the light background fabric. couple smaller squares and a couple of the strips. And see, there you go, all the fabric to make one of the blocks. So if that's the first set of blocks, I'm gonna do the same with the second set. They're just gonna get some slightly different pieces. They're still gonna get that bigger square. And again, I'm gonna do half of the blocks with a dark background and half of the blocks with a light background. It's gonna get a couple of those smaller squares, just like the first set, and then a couple of the strips. So I'm gonna go through and do that with all my prints. And then when I'm done, we'll start putting this block together. This block uses half square triangles, or HSTs, to give it its pointy look. And I feel there's nothing quite as mindless as sewing half square triangles. And it just so happens that each block uses 8 half square triangles. So we're gonna use the 8 at a time method to create them. So first I'm gonna set the other pieces of the block aside, and I just need the bigger squares of the background and the print. On the back of the bigger squares, I'm gonna draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. Then I'm gonna place it right sides together with the other square, like so. Get them nice and centered on top of each other. I'm gonna take it to my sewing machine, and I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam on each side of that line. So a total of 4 seams. I actually like to sew those lines a little bit closer than a 1/4 inch, more of a scant 1/4 inch, just because it gives me a little bit more wiggle room when it comes time to trim them. Once that's done, I'm gonna cut it in half twice, horizontal and vertical, and then on the diagonals. And just like quilting magic, that's gonna give me 8 half square triangles. So I'm gonna press them, trim them, and then we'll arrange them into our blocks. Even if I'm not participating in questionable discussions during quilt retreat, I still like these mindless kind of quilts. Especially when it's late at night and I'm sewing something easy and listening to my audiobooks, drinking a little wine. Just sounds like heaven to me. And it really doesn't matter which way you press these blocks. They can go to the light or to the dark or either one. And I'm just using my 3.5 inch ruler to square up those half square triangle blocks. Let's admit it, this is not the glamorous, fun part about making a quilt. Nobody's like, ooh, you know what I want to do? Trim 1,000,000 half square triangle blocks. But it really is worth it. It's gonna make those blocks go together better and make them easier to quilt later on, so it's just kind of the necessary evil. But one thing that helps is getting a ruler that's the exact size you're trimming your half square triangles to. That way I don't have to overthink it. I can just plop that ruler down and trim off the sides. My friend Irene calls this sliver trimming because when you're done, all you have is like little slivers of fabric. Now, I'm making these blocks one at a time just because it kind of fits my personality and kind of fits that whole idea of making it mindless. But if you wanted to be more efficient with it, you could make all the half square triangles and then lay out your blocks, or you could make them one at a time like I am. Once all those half square triangles are trimmed, it's time to get my other pieces for the block and to begin laying it out. Now I'm sure that you are much smarter than I am, but I have to pay extra close attention to these half square triangles. If I'm not careful, I'm gonna get one or more turned the wrong way. But I think everything is good to go, so I'm gonna start sewing my blocks together. I'm gonna start by sewing this section together, then sewing it to the bigger square, then I'll sew the rows together. And I'm gonna keep sewing until the whole block is together, and I'll show you what it looks like. Check out my first bear paw block. I love how the background fabric really shows off the prints. I mean, how freaking adorable is this? To make the quilt, I'm gonna need 5 blocks like this, and 5 blocks with the other background fabric. And 5 blocks that look like this. The other blocks are made the exact same way, I just flipped around the print and the background fabric. And the fact that that square in the center is a different fabric just makes me so happy. I made 5 with a light background and 5 with the dark background. The result is 4 blocks that are made the same way, they just look a little different. It's a little change, but I love how it looks. Now it's time to take these blocks and lay them out to make my quilt top. Each row is gonna have one of each of the blocks. Once they're all sewn together, this quilt top is finished. All I need to do is get it quilted, add my scrappy binding, and I'll be back to show you exactly what it looks like. And the quilt is finished. I love the geometric look of the blocks and how they show off the different fabrics. And the fact that it's just one block made over and over again is just the icing on the proverbial quilt cake. For the quilting, I decided to take the easy option and send it to my quilt shop to have them quilt. I know, I love machine quilting and it is my favorite part, but sometimes you just want a nice edge-to-edge design to get it finished quick. For our machine quilting services, we have so many different designs available. I decided to go with something that was a little bit curvy, helps kind of soften the geometric shape of those blocks. If you have a quilt top laying around that you want to be quilted, we can do that for you as well. We now have an option to mail it in online. It's as easy as going online, entering the size of your quilt, picking your design, and sending it to us. But whether you prefer mindless sewing or you just want a fast, fun project to make, the Bear Tracks quilt is going to be perfect for you. So don't forget, if you want to get the kit, the fabric, or the pattern, just click the link in the description box below. Well, thank you for joining me for another episode of the Midnight Quilter. I'll be back soon with another tutorial. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.